Week 11 of the fantasy baseball season, and here's a few hitters I look to sell and trade this week. The first guy, Jake Cronenworth of the San Diego Padres. So what a season it's been for Cronenworth, especially over the last few weeks, where he's ranked number one in fantasy baseball. So on the season, 7 home runs, 41 RBIs, 43 runs scored, a 254 batting average, and a 343 on base. But the last 2 weeks here for Cronenworth, 2 home runs, 13 RBIs, 14 runs scored, a stolen base, 400 batting average, and a 492 on base. So obviously those numbers aren't going to stick, what he's done over the last 2 weeks, with a 500 on base almost and the 400 average. And he qualifies at first, second, and short. So right there, he's a great sell-high candidate, is Cronenworth, with these stats way up, with his ranking way up, and number one over the last 2 weeks here. He's a guy I think you could trade and get a stud starting pitcher for him right now. The last few games here for Cronenworth: June 15th at the Cubs, 3 for 6, 2 runs, 2 ribs. June 16th at the Cubs, 1 for 3 with an RBI. June 17th at the Rockies, 2 for 3 with a run. June 18th at the Rockies, 2 for 4, 2 runs. June 19th at the Rockies, 2 for 5. June 20th versus the Diamondbacks, 1 for 3 with a homer, an RBI, a stolen base. And June 21st versus the Diamondbacks, 0 for 5. So right here, he's had a lot of multiple hit games over the last couple weeks here, is Jake Cronenworth. And it's just not going to stick, like I mentioned. And maybe it was start a little of the downfall, a little yesterday with the 0 for 5 ball game. So right now, if I'm a Cronenworth owner, I would put him on the trade block. And I think I could get a great starting pitcher for him, especially with the qualifications at different positions, which is big, especially at shortstop, which is obviously a weak position for fantasy baseball. So right now, I would sell Cronenworth high because these numbers are going to stick. And overall this season, his numbers ain't all that great, with the 7 and 41, but only a 254 average. So right now, it's just a hot streak, and I think he reverts back to just putting up mediocre numbers. The next guy is Rhys Hoskins of the Philadelphia Phillies. So Hoskins, it's been an up and down season for him, but when it's all said and done, usually he gets his stats as Hoskins. And on the season here, 13 home runs, 37 RBIs, 37 runs scored, a 251 average, and a 340 on base. But the last couple weeks for him as well, 5 homers, 12 RBIs, 10 runs scored, a 373 average, and a 467 on base. So right now, he's white hot, as well as Hoskins, and he's ranked number 3 in the last few weeks as well here, but it's not going to stick. He's not a big batting average guy, and he's also a guy that strikes out a decent amount of times, so the power is definitely legit. He'll finish the year 25 to 30 home run range, no doubt about it, but everything else here for Hoskins isn't going to be all that great, and his RBIs aren't going to be all that great as well this season. He's batting second usually for this Philly team, and he's not going to drive in a lot of runs. So June 13th versus Miami, 2 for 4 with a run and a rib. June 14th versus Miami, a monster game, 4 for 5, 2 homers, 6 RBIs. June 15th versus Miami, 2 for 4. June 16th at the Nats, 1 for 4 with a run. June 17th in a doubleheader at the Nats, 1 for 8 with a run. June 18th at the Nats, 1 for 1 with an RBI. June 19th at the Nats, 1 for 4. And June 21st at Texas, 0 for 1, but he did walk 3 times in that ball game. So right here, Hoskins, he's playing good right now, but like I mentioned, he's just really going to bring some power, and that's about it. The average ain't going to stay up over 370, and he's going to finish the year probably 27 homers, 65, 70 RBIs, and he'll probably bat anywhere from 240 to 250 when it's all said and done. So that's the pace his stats are going to be on. But right now, while he's on a tear over the last couple weeks here, he's a perfect sell-high candidate, is Hoskins, and I think you could get a good starting pitcher in a deal for him. The next guy is Andrew Vaughn of the Chicago White Sox. So Andrew Vaughn, we know he's been a highly touted prospect coming up through the college draft over the last few seasons. And this season, he's been pretty decent for the White Sox. 7 home runs, 31 RBIs, 22 runs scored, 326 average, and a 377 on base, but he's only had 187 at-bats here as well. And over the last 2 weeks here for him as well, he's been on a tear. 1 home run, 8 RBIs, 7 runs scored, a 396 average, and a 450 on base. And even going deeper into the stats in the last month here, in 104 at-bats, 3 homers, 17 RBIs, a 365 average, and a 404 on base. So right now, he's been on a tear in the last month here, is Andrew Vaughn. But there's no way he's going to finish the season here with a batting average even over 300, in my opinion, even though he's at 326 right now. Last season, he was just a home run guy pretty much, with 15 home runs and 400 at-bats with a 235 average. So Vaughn, so far, he's playing good baseball, no doubt about it. And this is where the sell high thing comes into play. Well, he's at peak value right now. I would flip Vaughn in a trade from the owner in a heartbeat, because his on-base to batting average isn't all that great, only 51 points higher. And like I mentioned, there's no way he's going to stay this hot, hitting almost 400 over the last few weeks. The last few games here for Vaughn: June 15th at the Tigers, 3 for 6 with a run. June 17th at Houston, 1 for 4. June 18th at Houston, 3 for 5, 2 runs scored. June 19th at Houston, 0 for 4. June 20th versus the Jays, 4 for 4, 2 runs, a homer, 2 RBIs. And June 21st versus the Blue Jays, 1 for 5. So right here, he's playing great baseball, and he's a perfect sell-high candidate, is Vaughn, because there's no way he finishes the season with this high of a batting average at all. The next guy, Gleyber Torres of the New York Yankees. So Torres, the last 2 seasons, he's been horrible for fantasy baseball. But this year, he's bounced back, and he's playing good. 13 home runs, 32 RBIs, 32 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, a 263 average, and a 312 on base. So Torres, he's cut down a little bit on the strikeouts this season here. But also another guy who really hasn't shown power since 2019, but the last month of the season as well. 8 home runs, 13 RBIs, 21 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, a 303 average, and a 354 on base. So another guy where he don't get on base really. He's a free swinger a lot, with his on base percentage only about 55 points higher than his batting average. In the last few games here for Torres: June 15th versus Tampa, 0 for 2. June 16th versus Tampa, 0 for 1. June 17th at the Jays, 2 for 4, 3 runs and a rib. June 18th at Toronto, 2 for 4, 2 runs. June 19th at Toronto, 3 for 5, a homer, 3 RBIs. June 20th at Tampa, 1 for 4 with a run. And June 21st at Tampa, 0 for 3 with a run. So right here, a great team and a great lineup, no doubt about it. Here is Torres. But now that he qualifies at second and short, not great positions in fantasy baseball, I would deal him off as well. Here's Torres, because I think he got in a little bit of a home run for Cheers Torres this season, but I still don't think this season, when it's all said and done, he finished the year with a great batting average. And even with the great month of the season, he's still only hitting 263, so he'll probably finish with 20 homers, 60 RBI range, 230, 240 average, but it's not going to be anything that great in my opinion. So right now, while he's had a good last month of the season, here's Torres, hitting over 300 and having 8 home runs in the time. It's a perfect time to sell him at peak value, because the last 2 seasons, we just know how bad he's been for fantasy owners. And the 5th and final hitter I look to sell and trade this week's Ryan Mountcastle of the Baltimore Orioles. So Mountcastle, a former top prospect in this Orioles system a few seasons ago. And last year, he had a pretty solid year, 33 and 89 with a 255 average. And so far this season, 12 home runs, 36 RBIs, 30 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, a 269 average, and a 306 on base. So another guy who's a free swinger, and he don't really get on base much more than hitting the baseball. In the last month of the season, he has 7 homers, 19 RBIs, and a 271 average in the time. And the last 2 weeks, though, is where he's really been getting it going, is Mountcastle. 4 homers, 11 RBIs with a 308 average in 52 at-bats. So right here, we know he's a good power hitter, but everything else as well you're not going to get from him. And Mountcastle got off to a horrible start until the last month, where he's picked things up here. June 14th at Toronto, 3 for 5, a homer, 2 RBIs, 2 runs scored. 18th at Toronto, 2 for 5, a run, 2 RBIs. June 17th versus Tampa, 1 for 4 with a run. June 18th versus Tampa, 2 for 4, run and a rib. June 19th versus Tampa, 0 for 4. And June 21st versus the Nationals, 1 for 4. So right here, I'm not saying to sell these guys off for anything, but I just think these guys are playing a little bit over expectations and what we're usually from these players that I've mentioned in this video. So Mountcastle definitely could have power, definitely could finish the year once again with 25, 30 home runs. But the batting average is fluky in my opinion. So right now, while everything's clicking on all cylinders for Mountcastle over the last month of the season here, I think he's a perfect sell-high candidate. And I think you could get a good starting pitcher in a deal or trade him for another position you need. Because obviously first base and outfield has plenty of great players at those positions. So if you want to flip Mountcastle for a second baseman or a shortstop, I think that would be a good deal as well. Or just for a starting pitcher. So that's a few hitters I look to sell and trade here for Week 11 of the fantasy baseball season.